Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Islam. The question which confronts us today is whether the law of Islam is capable of evolution. A question which will require great intellectual effort and is sure to be answered in the affirmative, provided that the world of Islam approaches it in the spirit of Omar, the first critical independent mind in Islam, who at the last moments of the Prophet's life had the moral courage to utter these words: "The book of God is sufficient for us." We will now continue with our interview with the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad.
Your Vision 2020, the program for the year 2020, it's quite interesting and challenging. How are you incorporating the principles of faith and matters of statehood together, or matters of scientific and industrial progress?
The Vision 2020 really implies that we should become as developed as the developed countries that we see today. In the year 2020, of course, by which time they will also be making progress. But we are very concerned that as we progress, we do not lose sight of our value system, our religious value system, and the good value system that we think is essential for the good of the country. So if we can do this, to us it is very important, because it will prove that Islam is not a millstone around our neck. It is not restraining us from achieving material success. But when we say material success, although we may be successful in material terms, we have to remember that material wealth in the Islamic way of thinking is not the same as material wealth under a different system. We have to remember that we are merely administrating for the time being the wealth that we acquire, that it is not really ours to do what we like with it. So we must conform with the teachings of Islam on the management of our wealth with regard to society, with regard to the future. So these values must be retained.
What in your own Vision 2020 or in the future do you see the role of women in a developing, industrializing society without sacrificing the Islamic way of life?
I think for a long time the Muslim community, despite the liberation of women on acceptance of Islam, tended to be a male-dominated society. And because it was male-dominated society, the interpretation of the teachings of Islam is affected. So much so that the teaching is concentrates on what is important for the men rather than what is important for the Muslim community or for Islam itself. And for the men, they have their own ideas that women should be out of the way, women should not participate in this and that. But if you look at the history of Islam, women have participated during the battle of Jabal Uhud, for example. The women were the nurses. They came to tend to the sick. So you cannot say that they have no role to play. How do you nurse if you have no understanding at all about nursing? And if in modern times, nursing is such a great skill, and apparently this is something quite suitable for women, they must learn how to do nursing in the 20th century, in the 21st century, not in the 7th century. So definitely there is a role for women to play. But in Islam, you can say that a woman and a man is physically the same. They are not the same. Even in terms of attitude and mental makeup, they're not the same. But there is nothing wrong in being different. They have certain roles which they are good at, and there are other roles where they are not good at, and they should do what they are good at. But sometimes we assume that they are not good at a certain thing, and we forbid them from doing it. But in fact, they have the capacity. Women engineers, women pilots and all that. Well, they have the same skills. They should be allowed to, because it diminishes the strength of the Muslim by relegating the women into the kitchen or into the house and preventing them from performing things which they are well able to do. So in Malaysia, we do try to give the women equal rights, but that doesn't mean that they must be men. They are women, and they have the rights to do what is fair, what they can do, and what sometimes they do better than men. Let them do. They are members of parliament, or they are ministers. They can become engineers or lawyers or whatever. We allow them. They should come into the community, but they must carry themselves with decorum. That doesn't mean that they should be so restrained and hampered so that they cannot perform their duties. I mean, if you start asking them to wear purdah, for example, obviously it is not so much the desire of the women, but the desire of the men to keep them like that. That is not what Islam is all about.
Surely you must incur the wrath of the very traditional people when you talk of women's reforms. What about the issue of polygamy? How have you handled this?
We try to refer back to the teachings of Islam, to the history of Islam, to support what we say. In polygamy, for example, it is quite obvious that if every man takes 4 women to be his wife, then there will be 3 other men who will not have a wife. And that would be wrong in any society, in a Muslim society certainly, because we value the family, we value the institution of marriage. You take away the women from the men, you are depriving them of their rights. So that should not be. But we are not against polygamy. Under certain circumstances, there should be polygamy. For example, as I say, after a war when many men have been killed and so many widows, then surely you should be doing a good thing to take an additional wife or 2. But it is not compulsory to have 4 wives. So don't go around and say, a religion asked me to have 4 wives. It's not true. So we argue on the basis of religion. And I think by and large it is accepted, except for the particular sect which spend their time looking for women to marry, as if this is all there is about Islam. It is not true.
What do you do with the opposition? This is really a very tough question for, I'm sure, for progressive leaders who are thinking about this issue.
I think it is important that in trying to do this, to return to the true teachings of Islam, we keep going back to the Quran and the Hadith, and to seek support from there, and also to the history of Islam, seek support from there. But if we argue, well, it is not practical and not modern, it is not in keeping with modern times, then of course you are going to weaken your argument. It is not a question of being modern or not modern. It is a question of being Islamic or not Islamic. Their interpretation is, to me, un-Islamic. They may say my interpretation is un-Islamic, but I would like to quote. For example, we have some states here have Friday as a weekend because they say it is Islamic. It is not true at all, because the idea of Sabbath is a Jewish idea, and in their religion, on Saturday you don't do anything at all. Even if somebody wants to kill you, you may not defend yourself. And then the Christians with their Sunday. But in Islam, the Quran says quite plainly, after Friday prayers, you spread out and do your work. Whoever asks you to take a holiday, And in fact, when you take a holiday on Friday, you are less likely to go to the mosque. You are likely to go to the beach and enjoy yourself. I would rather be working here, take 2 hours to perform my Jumu'ah prayers. So these are the wrong interpretations based on some wrong premise, but we perpetuate what is wrong.
I'm basically asking whether there is a need for, say, a think tank whereby issues, contemporary issues and issues related to Islamic thinking could be assessed, evaluated, and then, we may have a plan or a strategy for the next century.
I think it is very necessary, and I think there are many institutions of like-minded people. At the moment, they are not quite as influential as we would like them to be, but the links have been formed. Our own institutions here have established contact with many Islamic institutions elsewhere, and we exchange ideas, we exchange speakers, and we talk about these things, and eventually it is bound to spread. After all, even the wrong interpretation, when it began in a small way and then spread. The right interpretation also will have to go through the same process. It should begin and then slowly it should spread, and it will gather momentum one day. I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic. I won't see it, of course, not in my lifetime, but that doesn't matter.
If I was to ask you to convey in a very brief manner the essence of the message of the Quran to a non-Muslim, what would you want to convey?
And that Islam is a religion of peace. I think anything that is contrary to that is basically un-Islamic. You see? So if we must spread the teaching, it must be by preaching, not by the sword. But we need also to correct that spreading religion by the sword is confined to Islam, because other religions too have got fanatics, and they also use the sword to spread their religion. But we must always correct this wrong impression, not only on that score, but on many other things. We must correct that impression. The other thing is that we must not do what is wrong, and we must prove to the world that Muslims can be as successful in what is generally termed as non-religious field as anybody else. And there shouldn't be any reason why they cannot be successful.
So this is your interpretation of the Quranic principle of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar.
Yes. You have to do, if you want to do good, this is good. You see, you should avoid evil. By all means, everybody should avoid evil, but you have to understand what is good. And evil is a bit easier to understand, but sometimes people mix up what is good with all kinds of interpretations that they make on their own.
What is it that you want ideally for the Muslim Ummah? What is your ideal vision, in other words, for them?
They must be as successful in what would be termed as the worldly field as they are concerned for doing the right things according to the teachings of Islam. They must not forget their religion, but they must achieve success in this world.
And for Malaysia, where do you want to take it to? What is the ideal that you are thinking of?
Well, we're trying to put into practice some of the beliefs that we have, that as a Muslim country or a Muslim-dominated country, we can be successful. At the same time, we do not forget our religion, and we do not try to impose our values and our religion on those who are not Muslims, and yet we would like them to go along with us by practicing values which are compatible with Islam and with their own religion.
Islam and Muslims are often criticized in the West on the issue of human rights. How do I, as a Muslim living in the West, or for that matter any Muslim, defend this?
Well, at the moment, I don't think the West is in a position to criticize the Muslim. After seeing what is happening in Bosnia, they have lost their credibility. But that does not mean that because they have no credibility, we should not strive to achieve the right attitude towards human rights. We must prove to the world that Muslims are concerned about human rights, that they should not be oppressive, particularly of non-Muslims or even of their own people. We must prove to them that Islam is a religion that believes in the high principles and high human values. We must prove by deeds, not just by words, that this is what Islam is all about.
What comments do you have on this peace treaty between the Palestinians and Israel?
I think it is a good thing. I don't see the benefit of these decades of war between the Israelis and the Palestinians. To say that it should end by totally wiping out the Israelis is to be unrealistic, and Islam does not require us to be unrealistic. We should adjust, we must be flexible. So in a situation where you know very well that those unrealistic objectives cannot be achieved, you should try for what is achievable. I would regard this as a first step towards liberating the rest of the territories which were Palestinian.
What about the future of Jerusalem? Do you think that there could be some agreement on that also in the future?
There should be an agreement, but even if the Muslims eventually control Jerusalem, it must be remembered that it is the center, a holy place for all the three religions, and nobody should stop any other religion from going there and practicing their religion there. Everybody has a right.
During the time of Muslim rule, the city was open to all, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. That's why we object to the Jews doing that.
The issue of Kashmir is creating such great tension within the Indian subcontinent. What, in your opinion, should be done?
Kashmir is a very difficult problem. It is, again, the result of a historical event. To undo that will become very, very difficult. But the parties concerned must try to resolve it in a way that is not violent. I know what I say sounds very easy. It's not easy, but many problems that face this world takes a long time to resolve. We have to accept it. We can't resolve it today, and we cannot hasten the process. We have to give time for the matter to be resolved.
Is there any possibility that Malaysia could play a role in negotiations or bringing about some sort of settlement in this issue?
Not at the moment, I think.
I'm sure Malaysia will do very well or continue to do very well under your leadership, and we pray to God that He gives you the courage and the stamina.
This is J.D. Hall, thanking you for joining us this week and asking you to be sure and join us next week on Islam.